when Michael Eisner and Frank Wells came in, going out of a hole, which is negative zero, there's nowhere to go. The song that ends Mary Poppins Returns, there's nowhere to go but up. And it's a wonderful song, and it says so much about them coming in. Katzenberg just revived the animation with Roy Disney, and they came over. They admitted they knew nothing about building parks. They would learn, and I was lucky to be one of the people they trusted. And so they looked at my accomplishments and they said, that's a pretty good bank account. I'd done Journey into Imagination. I'd done the Big Thunder Mountain, and I had several other concepts in work, Star Wars, and they turned that on right away. It was all in one day. They came over on a Saturday, and he brought his young son, Breck. This is Michael's son, Breck Eisner. And he says, Breck's 14, he loves theme parks. I don't know anything about theme parks, so I hope you don't mind if he gives his opinion. And I'm going, great, my career. But it was great. It was, because I had never given a presentation to my audience. My eventual. So you're always converting it to make it appealing to people that are dealing with, will the stockholders think we're crazy investing and all this. And here's a kid, he goes, Dad, that's awesome. And he says, okay, what else have you got? We're doing that. What else? And like that, we were doing Star Tours. And then I had Splash Mountain, and I'm going, he won't like Brer Rabbit and Brer Bear and all that. He's 12 years old. So I really featured the dip drop in the middle in the dark, and that you'd have this highest, steepest waterfall. And then I slipped in the story of Brer Bear and Brer Fox and all that. And he said, Dad, that's even better than the Star Wars attraction. He goes, hey, okay, we're doing that. So these open next year or the year after that? And see, they knew nothing about 5 years for Splash Mountain, 3 years for, but they really jumped, and they said, okay, you take the time you need for that, but you're not going to tell me you can have a movie here next summer. So who's the hottest director? Coppola. Who's the hottest, young star today? Michael Jackson. Great. So get them together, and then bring in George Lucas just for good measure. And then he looked at all of us and said, they will have a movie here. You have the theater to put it in for next summer. And that was how Captain EO happened. Just crazy. Like that. The counterpoint to that was doing a ride that was basically an outsider's property was not really, in the Disney culture at that time. So we had to really quick prepare a traditional Disney ride. And we used up all the material that was really appropriate for doing rides, except for Splash Mountain, based on the stories of Song of the South. And it had Academy Award-winning music, Zippity Doo-Dah and whatnot. So it seemed a natural. Plus, we had a show that was on its last legs. This was 1989 when we opened, but America Sings had been made for the bicentennial in '76, and we didn't want to throw those characters out. So we found that they were all designed by Mark Davis, and Mark Davis had done all the model sheets for Song of the South. And so it was a perfect thing. They all looked like they were one and the same. So they migrated across Disneyland. They packed up their bags and moved to Critter Country.
And Michael saw this on that same Saturday.
He did. It was right after that, and I thought...
So he went on a shopping spree.
He did, and I thought the boy, Breck, would not like little characters and all that. And when I finished telling Splash Mountain, he said, that's even better than Star Tours, So I came into that meeting going, do we still have jobs? And I left it with, I got his Captain EO thing. We got to get Michael in here, and he picked what story he wanted to tell. We gave him 4.
And Captain EO came about because they wanted that would be a much quicker turnaround than an attraction that would take years to build.
Absolutely. Michael said, I know how to do movies, so you can't tell me it takes 3 years to make a movie. And so I sold this to Breck by saying it's got the longest, highest, steepest ever waterfall in the world on a flume ride. And that helped for his age group demographic. And of course we had the mix of Disney show with the fear factor of a thrill ride. And so it's been an odd kind of mix, but I think it's tempted people to do something that's outside their comfort zone. And then when they survive, they're really happy they did it, so.
And you said that was a happy accident in that Dick Nunes and the operating side of the parks were looking for a flume ride, and you didn't want to necessarily.
He wouldn't shut up about that. It was like, so have I got my flume ride yet? And you know, we have Knott's Berry Farm, and they have a really good flume ride at Knott's. It's still really good. And they just went in and put a whole lot of new audiometronics in it. And I thought, well, this will seem like we're copying, but doing a Splash Mountain thing with cartoons rather than loggers that they have in theirs, it was enough different that I was comfortable with it. And we had a problem that nobody was going to Critter Country. We only had Country Bear Jamboree, and it needed a big counterpoint ride because the other side of the park had the Matterhorn and Space Mountain. And we had Big Thunder, but this would balance it out.
And Country Bears was never as popular in Anaheim as it was here.
For some reason, country music in the South is a bigger thing. Like you have Tennessee and all of that, where Dolly Parton.
In other news, water is wet.
Yeah. But it's not in California, and so they built 2 theaters. We had 2, and you only have 1, and they were empty. You know, so yeah. Anyway, the Splash did help that.
And didn't the idea originate, you told me you were sitting in your car on the freeway and it just...
As I did every single day, and it was my 2-hour, before cell phones, you had 2 hours where nobody could interrupt you. And so you'd sit there and you'd go, the America Sings figures, we need something in Critter Country, and we have the Zippity Doo Dah characters from the movie. Okay, so I got into work and I said, I think we've got an idea here. You know, it's going to work. It works in the South. It works in that area of the park, and it can use all the characters we already have, and it's not like Knott's Log Ride. So anyway.
So let's set the controls for 1989, something that's very topical now.
Yeah.
The first big outdoor flume ride at Disneyland, Splash Mountain. Tell us about the creation of that and how you're feeling now that it's kind of going away.
Well, let's go back again to Little Mermaid. It was in production while we were conceptualizing Splash Mountain, but it wasn't anything you could bet the farm on back in 1985 when we got the approval to go ahead with Splash, 4 years ahead of its debut at Disneyland in '89. So, you know, you wouldn't say, oh, let's bet this entire IP on something that is sight unseen. And probably Little Mermaid had nothing to do with the locations that we were putting them in. So we were losing America Sings because it had been built. It was a audiometronic show by Mark Davis with great characters. Later turned out that much of the design Mark did for America Sings, he had done, 30 years before for the movie Song of the South, for the characters in that. We found, what do you call them? Character model sheets for about 50% of the characters that were in America Sings were similarly created for Song of the South. So we had to land there in the New Orleans outback, if you want to call it, at Disneyland, and we had this IP that was from '46, Song of the South, and at that time it was still in theaters, so there wasn't I love the revisionist stuff now, because I remember Michael Eisner said, well, let's put it out again to see if there's still interest in this movie that's from the '40s, and I think in that last reissue in theaters, it did better than it did when it came out. It was like very, very successful. So none of that controversy really existed. We worked with the NAACP, and we had Michael Jackson's staff in-house working on Captain EO, and we tested it out on every group before we went forward with it, and ended up saying that the dialect was something that they liked, especially the NAACP, because it puts their ancestors into the Disney park to hear characters. I mean, they're all animals and stuff, so you don't see any ethnicity in the whole ride, but you could tell that they were characters, that were of the Black, background. So they were comfortable with that. They said that puts us in the framework of American history, and just stay away from the words that have gone on to have worse meanings. like Uncle Remus and a Tar Baby and things like that. And so it was very minor. And so they were very happy with it. And we were actually able to get one of the cast members, Nicodemus, I can't think of his last name, but he did Brer Bear. And
Wow.
he came in to do that. It was like 35, well, from 46 to 40 years later. So that was pretty cool. And so we thought we were on good footing, and we certainly wouldn't want it. There was nothing in the ride. I will stand by this even today. There was not one thing in the ride that in any way was detrimental to anybody. You know, whatever the controversy is come up with, it's more related to what the film is. And I think we're way overboard on that kind of sensitivity, like taking down the elephants in Hollywood and Highland because they were from a film called Intolerance, which is the absolute opposite of, you know, lack of tolerance. It was about, you know, that issue. And because Griffith, who had made Intolerance, also did Birth of a Nation, which does have some poorly designed sequences, you know, the oppression of Black people and slavery. But to say what the elephants have to go because they were made by a director who did another movie, I mean, come on. I mean, now you've got nothing there. There's no personality. It's a bland center that's like anywhere else on the planet. And we actually took the two that are in Disney's California out at about the same time, that were the gateway to Hollywoodland. So I don't know. I mean, that's kind of getting into a thing where, you know, I have another, this is a side jump here, but if you're going to take something out, be it as simple as a tree that's maybe getting dangerous because of its size, you've got to have another thing ready to go in. And too often what I see, and the elephants are a good example of that, where they take it out and they have no idea to what to put back. In front of Tomorrowland, we had these kind of futuristic rocks that guided your eye towards the astro orbiter in the middle. And someone says, I don't like those rocks. They look like, somebody said, French fries from the future or something. And so they ripped them out, revealing the pump room for our fountains there. And now for 4 years, there's been a construction wall as the gateway entrance to Tomorrowland around those fountain pumps on the left side, you know? And I mean, come on, guys, where was your big idea? You know, it's one thing to take them out because you don't like them. Fine. So what are you putting in? You know, because the gardens there were, to me, about future agriculture. And, you know, boy, am I going on side trips now, but, you know, some of our lands are defined by their landscape. So Adventureland is tropical foliage and palm trees, et cetera. Frontierland is, you know, obviously pine trees and cactuses and so forth. And maybe you could say Fantasyland would be about flowers and sculpted topiaries and whatnot. So what is the plant of tomorrow? You know, what is the bush of the future? And I thought, with all the horrors we live with every day, why not every single thing that you look at in that land is edible? And that was our plan. And for a while, they were really sticking to it. And, you know, I'd hear people out in front going, are those oranges real? You know, because people come to our parks that have never seen a citrus tree, you know, in a non-temperate climate. So, you know, and people say, well, what if they pick them? And I go, then fine. And we actually saw people, we had beautiful heads of butter lettuce growing over by the restaurant in Tomorrowland. And people would open up their burger and take out the lettuce and put in fresh leaves of lettuce. So we had to be very careful that it was all organically, you know, treated in those beds and everything. So it was perfectly okay to eat anything. But I guess I got tired of it. But you're missing a chance to tell story without words. You know, you're telling it with, you're walking through the future and you're saying, the one thing I worry about is will there be enough food? I mean, there's ads on the radio now saying, come and buy 25 years of macaroni and cheese that you can store in your basement, you know, to avoid the apocalypse. And I think, you know, our job, you know, about the topic of the future is to show hope. And if you can literally lean over and pick a grape off of a vine, so be it. What's wrong with that? You know, that to me is what it should be about. So let's see, we were back on Splash Mountain.
Yeah.
But one comment on that, Tony, I mean, that fits so well what you were doing there with Walt's overarching idea of optimism that was really infused in every land in the park on opening day. You know, it was all about, you know, this was, we just came out of this depression and Second World War in the 50s, you know, it was about this, everybody's going to have jetpack, you know, we're all going to be, you know, living in the house of tomorrow.
Yeah.
You know, but every story that Walt was telling had some optimistic underpinning to it, you know, the challenges of the new frontier, going to, you know, fight, you know, our forefathers having to go across rivers and climb mountains, you know, find a new land for us. You know, the Tomorrowland was all about the promise of, you know, technology, and he was showcasing it because he really believed in it. You know?
Well, I
So,
think, go ahead. Sorry.
No. So I was just relating back to what you were trying to do in Tomorrowland. I thought was just an extension of everything that Walt had done and what Disneyland tried to do in terms of sending this message about optimism.
Yes. And I think, you know, going back to Splash for a minute, you know, it's a good example of starting with what is the audience coming to at that? Well, there's a huge fear factor. And we were playing it up because it was at that time, the tallest, steepest hill that had ever been done. And we were introducing a dip drop thing in the dark that defied what a gravity-based, you know, flume ride should do by going back up instead of, you know, splashing down. So we knew we had the thrill factor coloring how people would approach the ride. And to be honest to them, we showed that. We said, first of all, we have to put that on display out in front because it's, as Walt would call it, a weenie. It's something to attract people, but it's also something to guide people on their tolerance of whether, you know, I can do this or I'm going to stand here and wait for the rest of the family while they do it, and overcoming it because they later hear that we've got a huge cast of animatronic characters that they really want to see. So maybe they'll get enough courage to face their fears and overcome them. So, you know, you do a first pass of like really understanding what the audience is coming to. And in a thrill ride, the last thing that you're concerned about is story, really. It's a frame, in this case, the South. It's critter country. So we were borrowing from what Mark started with, the bear country and the Country Bear Jamboree, to take, you know, Southern critters and put them along a track to amplify the moods that are going on in the guest. So we know there's an overall apprehension that doesn't go away until the giant lift or the giant hill is behind you. You know, you can be distracted a little bit in between that, but you're still, you know, that lift going up is where the big moment occurs. And so to try and ladle on storytelling is crazy. And I think, you know, Knott's Berry Farm has way too much data on their log flume ride, you know, that nobody is paying any attention. And, you know, they're beautifully done figures, but you're just whisking by them and not really understanding what's going on other than the general nature of it being a logging operation. So we really, I think the first thing we did after nailing our audience, saying that they're apprehensive, they're anticipating this big thrill, they are kind of excited about getting wet, depending on your viewpoint. Some people are going, especially in Florida, I can hardly wait to get wet, and other people, I hope I don't get wet, I'm going to buy a parka or a plastic. And so now you start taking the realities of that and marrying them to the emotions of what you've got to work with. And so we realized that the big drop is a sense of relief, a sense of conquering your fears, all of that. So you want to then, you know, climax that by taking people into a scene that gives that celebration of overcoming and surviving. And this just happened with all this talk going on about the changes. Someone wrote into something I was reading, and he said, when I was 10, I was absolutely afraid of all the thrill rides at Disney. And I would sit outside while my family had all this fun and everything. And I just sat waiting for them to come off. And then late one night, I said to my mother, I think I'm ready to do Splash Mountain. And he said, so we get on the ride and I'm sitting there and my heart is like leaping out of my chest. And then he said, we got to that point where the two buzzards saying, well, you want a laughing place? I'm going to show you. And he said, I thought I was going to die as we went under those buzzards and started that thing.
Yeah.
And he said, and then I hung on with all my might. And when we got to the bottom, he said, I had this euphoria that I conquered something that my entire life had been an impasse. And then we came into this room and he didn't know the song, and he said, but there were all these animals celebrating that I had overcome my fear. And then he wrote, since then, I've climbed mountains, I have spoken, I have done, exhibition, judo around the world. I've done all these things that really go back to that night when I overcame that thing and I was celebrated for having done that. So what that says to me, the lyrics in the song, they're okay and whatnot, but it's really the sense that you got of rounding that bend. And here are all these characters going to town on your left and your right, in front of you. I think there were more audiometronics in that scene than anything we've ever done, celebrating. And you've got a boat full of people going, how wet are you? Oh, I'm soaked. Oh my God, my hair is wrecked and all that. And then you're not going to say, and now, Brer Fox and nobody cares, it's just zippity doo, how no, what a wonderful day. And the euphoria of that moment. And I mean, basically what you do, we did it twice before. I think that's the most important one, because at that point and only at that time are you relieved. You're in a different emotional state than you were the earlier ones. But the first one is a minor drop and you come into a land where they're all welcoming you. How do you do? Great day to see you. Da, da, da. And so that was perfect for like, well, that wasn't so bad. And they're all happy to see me here and all of that. And then you drop down into the laughing place, which is diabolical. And when you recover from the fact, like, what the hell happened there when we came back and all the bees are swarming around, and then everyone is just hysterical from that point on. They're all barreled over with laughter. And that's exactly what 90% of the people in the boat are doing at that point, because they're all, what happened? How did they, what happened to us? How did they do that? What did the track do? And, so you're all going, caught by surprise. And so you get caught up in the whole laughter thing. And then you set up, there's nothing greater than that giant hill. And we took a song, Laughing Place, and went into low key with it. So instead of everybody's got a laughing place, we dun, 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 dun. And then the buzzard's going, you think you've seen a laughing place, we'll show you. So everything again is designed to take you to the mood that we know you've already got in the back of your brain and intensify it. When that man was recounting his 10-year-old self, when the buzzard said that and that his heart was leaping out of his head, that's exactly what we wanted for that moment, so that it intensified the fear, but then the survival is incredibly greater because it's amplified by the joy and celebration at the end. But those are the way in which you have to approach storytelling in a thrill ride. But to go further than that and try and say, dinosaur, let's say, you're going to be asked to get a dinosaur and bring it back through the time window before it closes. No, we're not. We're sitting in a vehicle, and you're not giving me anything that really prepares me and intensifies the experience. So you've got to, put aside the dreams of your epic 2-hour motion picture and think about your, guest-centered experience that's aimed at reinforcing the things they're bringing to the equation and the surprises you're going to give them along the way that intensify that. So I'm very proud about Splash Mountain having such a high regard and recognition that it did and still does. I think I just saw a chart where it's still listed as the #1 fan favorite in Walt Disney World, even though it's not there. And that poll came out a month ago and it's been gone since January. Wow. So hopefully the new version will do something that takes regard for that, because the track is the same. So they're working with the exact same set of realities that people bring to an experience like that. That's all about getting wet and having your stomach lift out of your, up a few degrees. So
I
So,
just
I just want to say, Tony, I had the extreme honor and pleasure of taking your fantastic design and then translating it over to Japan. We had to make some alterations.
You made it better because they have more money.
We had more money, and it was always, always when you do the second time around, you can improve on things. But
well, it was actually that was the third one, Joe, because we had the one in Florida, which was
Walt Disney World and Tokyo were being done kind of simultaneously.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I just read one funny little story aside. You were mentioning about people getting wet, and at the time there was this belief that the Japanese don't like to get wet. But it was mostly around the fact that at that time, women were still wearing kimonos, expensive kimonos in the park. And they were afraid that, you're going to ruin the kimono. So we actually, if you remember, Tony, we built drop 5 and had to engineer the splash out of it.
Oh, wow.
What's funny is with all the talk now, of course, that one is staying. So the good news here is that there will still be a Splash Mountain in the Disney canon. And it's the best one. And for a lot of reasons, that restaurant that you attached to it, Grandma, whatever it was, is Grandma's so cool. Yeah, right. And you had more space, so the scenes are, laid out a little better. But this summer they capitalized on all the hype they're having something like the Splashiest Splash, and they've added jets all through the ride that squirt you. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Funny. That's hysterical. Yeah. So one last thing about what you were saying, the popularity of that ride, and in Tokyo is I think always one of the top rated attractions. There's a wonderful Japanese movie called The Afterlife, and it's about people going to like this purgatory, the waiting room before they move on to whatever their final reward is after they die. And they ask people in that waiting room, what was the one moment in your life that touched you the most? And one of the people that are waiting in the room says it was going on Splash Mountain.
Oh my God.
Disney.
Wow.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, and how sad that the name is going to be gone, because there's the Disney Mountain Range. Why didn't they just call the new one Jazz Mountain or something, just to maintain?
I don't think we've ever had, I went through the same crisis with the removal of Bear Band, because taking out the Toad Ride. And I looked at the situation and I said, if I authorized them to take out this Toad Ride to put in Winnie the Pooh, like they did in Florida, there would be no Toad Rides anywhere in the world. And I don't know how back in 1955, when Walt and Claude and Mark and everybody, that they came up with the idea of a ride that you are reckless, you again, you're in a car and you're reckless, and because you're reckless, you get run over by a train and go to hell, like that's so I thought we can't lose this, because there's no way in the world we live in that anything like that could ever be done again. So I opted to go with the Bear Band, because you have the one in Tokyo and the one in Florida still exists. And so I thought everything would be fine, but you can't please there's just so many different Disney audiences that, how could you take out the Country Bear Jamboree? And I've explained this over and over again. So it's like Solomon deciding who gets the baby, I don't know. But I feel it was the right move. And so we still have one Toad Ride. And the cool thing about Splash is the best one is still in operation. Well, the Country Bear Jamboree kind of had already given us an angle on that, because they were very cartoon bears, but situated in this bear country. So we thought, well, okay, if it's going to be more than bears, but in the same kind of frame, because the most amazing thing that we got into is, of course, Mark Davis designed both Country Bear Jamboree and America Sings. Mark Davis also did all the model sheets, or at least approved them all, for the movie Song of the South. So when we went to the archives and found that in that movie, like the Mother Possum with her babies, that was done for the movie Song of the South, and it was in America Sings. So the commonality between all of those more or less set the dictate. Then now we step back and we said, it's residing in Frontierland. So the exterior has to be something that maybe we haven't quite done before. That the rock forms are fantastic in a way that you would never see in nature, but when you looked at it, you believed that it was nature. So it wasn't like that it jumped out, it's a cartoon sitting next to the Haunted Mansion. That was a big concern, because the building is as big as the Haunted Mansion. And when it was in steel, again, it was another Brett moment where you're going, oh my gosh, it's right next to the Haunted Mansion, you know, and I kept saying, it's not gonna look like a building, it won't look like a building. And that, I think it was easier with the characters inside, because it's like when you go into a movie theater, when you sit down in the seats with your popcorn, anything can come on the screen. So we knew we could take you from the first 3 minutes of that ride was pretty naturalistic. You know, you're outside and you were looking at real plants and all of that. And then all of a sudden, whoosh, you're down into a kind of dreamlike world where it became much more like Country Bear Jamboree, and it was of the same, I thought, how do you get a thing where the consistency of style, because you're talking style. Mark Davis had a very distinct style, and he was also the best visual storyteller, I think, ever. If you think of a scene like the dog with the keys in the prison, the pirates in prison, if the animation is broken and the soundtracks are not working, any person can look at that scene and analyze exactly the fun and the humor of what's going on. So all of those things that you can hear it or they move are bonuses. But I think we jump to the end right away expecting everyone will hear it. And you know, it's really hard to hear in those rides. It's really complicated. And sometimes the emotion isn't working. So how do you create a scene that absolutely tells you what's going on? And for that, I wish we had more people like Mark Davis, but I think that was probably the big part of it. So, you know, it was unique.
One more